I'm going to go ahead and get us started. We are excited today to have Carly, who is one of the grant officers with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, in here to share about their recreation grants. We are recording our session today. We ask that everyone turn off their cameras and mute themselves during the presentation. I'll be monitoring the chat so you can share your questions there. I'll share them with our presenters. Julia Hill is running tech for us today. Thank you, Julia. Once again, we're recording today's session and I'll share it tomorrow in an email. If you're uncomfortable with your name showing, you can change your name to anonymous and then private message Julia with your name so we can register your attendance. And I'm going to go ahead and give our land acknowledgement. Texas Children in Nature Network is headquartered in Austin, and as such, I'm on the ancestral and unceded land of the Tonkawa, Cherokee, and Sana people. Our ongoing colonial presence on indigenous lands compels us to take action now to counteract the effects of colonization. The work we do through the Texas Children in Nature Network is one small step towards that effort. I'm going to put a little information in the chat about land acknowledgements and about the people who live here where I am officed. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Carly. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And I really look forward to talking with you all today. Again, my name is Carly Blankenship, and I'm with Texas Parks and Wildlife's Community Outdoor Outreach Program. That's within the Recreation Grants Department at Parks and Wildlife. And I'm really excited to talk to you guys today. I know that everybody with TCIN is made up of a variety of different organizations, whether you're nonprofit, government, an education entity, formal, informal education. There's all sorts of you guys here. And our department has quite a few different grant resources available for you, no matter what your need might be. And I'll start off this whole presentation saying that the grants I'm going to talk about today are not comprehensive for the whole agency, just our little working group. And our working group has about 5 different grant programs. So there are others available. I just may not be talking about those today. I'll also say that I'm with the co-op grant program, and we'll talk about that soon, but you may have some specific questions on other grant programs. I may or may not know the answer for you. I'll definitely try to answer those questions. But if I don't know the answer, I'll just direct you to whoever the manager for that program is. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. All right, so who are we? The recreation grants, our purpose is really to administer federal and state funding grants to support Tpwd's mission. And our mission is to manage and conserve the natural and cultural resources of Texas and to provide hunting, fishing, and outdoor recreation opportunities for the use and enjoyment of present and future generations. Long definition, but our working group is really all about giving away different state and federal grant programs to assist with a variety of different needs. We're a pretty small working group that's within the State Parks Division of the agency, where we have about 5 different grant programs within our working group, and all of those sometimes have multiple different grant opportunities. About 20 people are in our little department. So we're a small section of Texas Parks and Wildlife as a whole. So what are the grant opportunities I'm going to be talking about today? We have 5 primary grant opportunities. That is the Boating Grants Program, the Community Outdoor Outreach Program, which is what I mainly manage, the Local Parks Grant Program, Recreational Trails, and the Target Range Program. Each of these programs includes 1 or more grant opportunities. And all of these programs have different funding resources. They're either federal or state grant funds, so that depends on what requirements go with those. And each program has their own requirement, their own application, their own evaluation process and rules that go along with that. So what I'm going to do today is just go over, it's going to be a lot of information for you, but I'm going to go over the basics of each particular grant program. What are their deadlines? What do they typically fund? And how much money can you request and how to apply? So I'll go over all of those with you today. And then if you have any questions, we'll be doing questions at the end, and I can definitely help direct you to whoever you need to talk to for each program. So I'll start off with the boating grants program. This really supports the construction of new or renovation of existing public boat ramps, boating infrastructure for transient vessels, and boat sewage pump out stations. Really exciting stuff, but essentially all things of boat infrastructure. There's 3 primary programs with the boating grants. These are the boating access, which supports boat ramps and courtesy docks and infrastructure needed to support those facilities like restrooms, parking areas, access roads, benches, picnic tables, pavilions, fish cleaning stations, and then the dredging needed to actually help that area have water around it. And next we have the boating infrastructure program, which constructs boat slips and supporting resources such as the restrooms and showers, water, laundry facilities. The main types of projects for these grants are coastal marinas for vessels that are 26 feet or longer and stay docked for less than 15 days. And so these are people going on, long-term trips with their boats, and they need a place to do their laundry or take a break or kind of refresh on materials there. And then last we have the boat sewage pump out program, which supports the installation, operation, and maintenance of boat sewage pump out facilities, pump out boats, and educational programs with a focus on keeping Texas waters clean. So all of that kind of pump out stuff, both the infrastructure and the education components are included with that program. So this program is going through a little bit of transition right now. We're actually in the process of hiring that the boating program manager. So the deadlines are up in the air. We don't have any specific deadlines right now, but they will be announced soon. The recreation group has a newsletter, and that's where we put out all the information for all of our grant programs. And so once the deadline will be announced for this, it'll be on both on our website, and we'll do an announcement on the recreation grants newsletter. So with the 3 different boating programs, they all have some kind of structure and requirements with that. I'm not going to go through in detail all the different requirements because if you're interested in this program, you can definitely go, I encourage you to go to their website and look at more. But in general, all 3 programs have a 75-25 split for match, which means the sponsor must provide at least 25% in matching costs for the project. That's often a little bit of a challenge for people, but it's a 75-25 split there. Since this program's in transition, the grant ceilings aren't really available. Typically, the grant ceilings for the 3 different programs here vary depending on what funding is available that year and which program you're applying for. A lot of it depends on which funding sources those come through. So they are typically different for that. But again, those will be announced once the grants become available. Funding for these 3 programs come from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service via the Sport Fish Restoration Act, and the funds are derived from federal motorboat gas and federal excise tax on the sale of fishing tackle and trolling motors. So essentially all the tax money that's spent on all of that fishing tackle and boating supplies comes back into the program to support additional fishing and boating infrastructure. Eligible applicants for this program. For the boating access program, only local governments can apply. However, for the boating infrastructure and pump out programs, you can either be a public entity or a private entity to apply. So both of those are definitely eligible for that program. And actually the picture here is one of the, I believe it's the boating infrastructure projects. It's a coastal marina project down on the coast. So it's a really cool and a massive site. But if you're ever able to go down there, it's a really cool facility. Next up is the Community Outdoor Outreach Program. And again, this is the program that I specifically manage, so I can definitely answer more of those questions for you. But this program typically supports programming that engages underrepresented audiences and mission-related activities. Examples of what we typically support for this program include summer camps, community camping programs, outdoor adventure and environmental education clubs, youth development recreation programs, adaptive recreation sports, and then PE courses that maybe incorporate archery, fishing, or kayaking into their PE courses. So there's a big range of different programs available here. Our target demographics when we're talking about underrepresented audiences include female, minority, low income, and individuals with a disability. So you can serve a broader audience for that, but projects that serve these target demographics tend to be a little bit more competitive in the grant review process. I will say that this is the only non-construction grant program within our working group. And so everybody else does construction of some sort of facility or trail. We are the only ones that support the actual just program. We cannot support any sort of construction, but co-op will support all of those programming costs such as personnel, travel expenses, entrance and camping fees, and then all of those supplies like fishing, hunting, kayaking gear, all of that is eligible through this program. All right, so the good thing about this program is there is absolutely no match requirement. You can tell us what sponsor contribution you might be bringing to the table, but we're not going to hold you accountable for that. You are not required to have any sort of match. And so we want to be able to give you the funding that is associated with your program. So that's why we don't have that requirement. The deadline to apply is November 1 of every year. We've been changing the deadline over the time, but for now, moving forward, it's going to be November 1. So that deadline is definitely coming up. It takes a little bit to apply for this program, so we recommend starting the application process as soon as possible. You have about, 6 more weeks to apply for the grant. We also hosted a grant writing workshop this past Tuesday. We typically do those to go through just all the steps of the application process. And so that grant writing workshop is available. It was recorded for you, and it should be on our website pretty soon in the next couple of days. And where you apply for our programs is called Recreation Grants Online. There's a little resources section there where you can find resources for all the different grant programs, but for co-op, a link to that grant writing webinar should be available probably by next week. Co-op is available to all tax-exempt organizations. So that includes municipalities, nonprofits, schools, churches, and the funding for this program comes from a portion of the sales tax collected on sporting goods in Texas. So again, whenever you're out there buying fishing, hunting, kayaking gear, a portion of those sales tax monies come back to Texas Parks and Wildlife to support the community outreach program.
Carly, we've got a question in the chat that I think I think probably a lot of people have the same question, which is, can you explain integrating the education program, Tpwd education programs for the co-op grant?
Absolutely. So there's a number of different varieties here, and a new requirement for co-op is integrating some sort of relationship with Tpwd. And I have a few of those different Tpwd relationships here. So it is a competitive grant process, and so projects that serve our target audience in activities that will develop like long-term mission-related impact to those participants and a connection with the audiences and Tpwd resources will typically give you a more competitive grant program. And it is a requirement for the co-op grant that you have at least one direct relationship to Texas Parks and Wildlife. That's a new requirement in the last couple of years, but it really goes back to our mission of this program's trying to diversify the audiences engaged with the agency. So we want to make sure there's one sort of direct relationship component there to Texas Parks and Wildlife. That doesn't have to just be Tpwd education programs. So that could be visiting a Tpwd facility, whether that's a state park or WMA, historic site, anything owned and operated by the agency. Integrating the Tpwd education programs or having one of our staff members work directly with your participants. And so what we have here is the priorities include integrating Tpwd education programs. That's just one of those potential relationships. And there's a variety of different education programs that fit into that, and I can definitely follow up with a lot more information, but we have a lot of education resources such as like hunter education, angler education, boating education. We have our Texas Outdoor Family Program, which assists people in camping. We have our Texas Aquatic Science Program and our Project Wild Suite, which is really more of environmental education curriculum. So there's a lot of different education components. That's only a small part of them, but I do have a resources document if you want more information about that, that does list all of those Tpwd education resources. So I hope that helps answer your question there. All right, so again, the deadline to apply is November 1. I had talked about the priorities. Again, this is a pretty competitive grant program. We typically only fund about maybe half of the applications come in. So we're really looking for those deep connections and impact to your participants served, meeting our target audience, and then you know, how well you integrate some of those Tpwd relationships. That's all part of the application and review process. So next up, I'm going to move on to the Local Parks Grant Program. So this program has 5 individual grant programs that assist local governments with the acquisition and or development of public recreation facilities throughout Texas. So there's quite a few different grant opportunities within the Local Parks Grant Program. This is probably one of our bigger grant programs throughout our little department. Examples of different projects include building sport fields, splash pads, pools and aquatic centers, skate parks, kayak launches, playgrounds, picnic facilities, trails, pavilions, and recreation centers. That's definitely not a comprehensive list of all of the different things that this program will support, but there's definitely a wide variety, all having to do with kind of the local parks there. So for this program, it's important to know that all the features that are supported by that program must be dedicated as parkland in perpetuity, meaning that it must permanently remain as parkland moving forward. Our staff will actually go and do site visits every few years to make sure that that facility or that park is still there and has most of the main elements that were initially supported by the grant. So that's definitely one thing to keep in mind for this grant program. The deadline to apply is October 1, so the deadline's coming up pretty quickly. I will say that it's a pretty long application process and you need a lot of different documents just because the nature of construction is like that. So you only have a couple weeks left. If you haven't started the process by now, you may have a very difficult time submitting everything in time by the October 1 deadline. The next application round, the deadline may bump up to August 1 to better align with federal and state funding deadlines, just to make it easier on us and to be able to get grants out a little bit quicker. Again, it's a long application process, so definitely if you want to apply for a local park grant, you may want to start thinking about that now for next year's deadline. All right, so there's 5 different main grant programs here, and there's another grant program here that I didn't list. It's not offered every single year, but it's not listed here. The deadline's already passed, but the main 5 programs include the urban outdoor and urban indoor facilities, which primarily means that the population is over 500,000. The non-urban outdoor and non-urban indoor facilities, meaning the population is less than 500,000, and the small community grant for those areas with a population under 20,000. All of these grant programs have a 50-50 match, meaning that you're required to have at least 50% of those grant funds and that supporting match element for whatever you're applying for. The 2 urban programs have a cap of 1.5 million. The non-urban outdoor has a cap of 750,000. The non-urban indoor has a cap of 1 million, and small community grants have a cap of $150,000. Not all of these grant programs are offered every single year. It often depends on how much money is available for this program. And so if there's not as much money left in one particular year, they may not offer one or more of these different programs here. But if you have any questions on if you qualify for something offered this year, the local park staff is really wonderful, and they can definitely help you out. So all local parks grants are only open to government entities applying. And so that includes cities, counties, river authorities, utilities, and other special districts. So unfortunately, this program is not eligible to any nonprofit or other tax exempt that's not a municipality or a government entity. Funding for this program is a variety of different federal and state resources, including the state sporting goods sales tax, similar to co-op, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and federal offshore gas royalties. Again, if you have any questions here, this is definitely one of our biggest grant programs. There's a big staff of, I think, 5 whole people managing all of these grants, and they're going to be able to provide you quite a bit more information of what you need. It's a pretty lengthy application process, and they'll definitely help you out along the way to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row before you apply. All right, so next up we have the Recreational Trails program. And this program provides funding for both motorized and non-motorized recreation trail projects. So examples of this program include new trail construction, renovation, trail amenities, trailheads, signage, and acquiring like trail corridors. This is the trail program. And so if you are wanting support for like sidewalks or anything that's not necessarily a full-on trail program, it must have kind of those typical trail elements associated with it here. The picture shown here is actually a project. It's a trail bridge feature that was constructed at Tyler State Park, utilizing the Texas Conservation Corps crews, which is an AmeriCorps program, a really great program for young people getting involved and doing all sorts of different public land improvements. And so we actually work very closely with the Conservation Corps to help build a lot of the trails, especially in state parks. And this is one of our really cool projects that they constructed in Tyler State Park. The Recreational Trails program does support trail projects both in Texas state parks and on other public lands throughout Texas. So it doesn't have to be a state park. If it's a local city or something, they can support that. Also, if it's through a nonprofit entity and that trail is open to the general public, all of those different types of trail projects are eligible. So the details for this program, the deadline to apply is February 1 of each year. I don't believe the applications have opened yet for this program, but they should be opening really soon. So again, I recommend getting all of your ducks in a row right now, as the deadline is definitely going to be coming up in February. For all trail grants, there's an 80-20 match split, meaning the sponsor must provide at least 20% of the total project cost. They can provide more, but the bare minimum is definitely 20% for those costs. The max funding request for this program is $200,000 for non-motorized projects and $400,000 for motorized. When we're talking about motorized, that's really like off-way highway vehicles, OHVs, and all of that. That's really what we're talking about in that motorized section. I'll say that right now I have listed $400,000 for this program, but that's currently under review. This is another program where it depends on how much money is available. So there's a chance that in the near future or far future, who knows, that these funding limits will go up. So there could potentially be higher limits that you could apply for with this grant program. But as of right now, it's still $200,000 and $400,000 for motorized. So for this particular program, Tpwd administers the National Recreation Trails Fund in Texas, which is overseen by the Federal Highway Administration. So this is primarily federal funds that are used for the trail program. The grant funds available for this program are derived from a portion of the federal gas tax generated by gasoline purchases of off-road motorcycles and four-wheelers. So definitely that motorized component there definitely helps support all of these different trail projects. So competitive trail projects typically include sustainable design elements that provide a high recreational value, including things like a multi-use and ADA accessible trails. Those grant projects that include a partnership with like a youth corps tend to be a little bit more competitive, and sites should also have a clear, feasible site and maintenance plan associated and submitted within the application. So they really need to be able to understand exactly what your project is applying for, the maps. They want to make sure that you really have that program fully developed. State and federal agencies, as well as government subdivisions like MUDs and ISDs, are eligible for this program, as well as tax exempt organizations. So if you're a nonprofit, you'll definitely be eligible as well. Don't quote me on this, but I believe if you're like a nonprofit or something, that trail must be available to the public for at least a certain percentage of time. Again, don't quote me on that, but they do like that, that public trail component to be part of your project. This program has really supported different trail projects all throughout the state of Texas. It's kind of amazing how many different trail projects they have going on, and there's a really great trail crew that helps this component. There's also a pretty deep partnership with Texas Conservation Corps to help do some of that work specifically in state parks. So a pretty cool program here. All right, so last up, we also have the Target Range Grant Program, and this program provides grants to develop safe, accessible, and public shooting facilities that align with Texas Parks and Wildlife's hunter education activities and programs. So with this particular program, there's a really deep connection with our hunter education program and all of the components that they have through there. If you don't know that program, it's a really great component to learn everything to do with hunting, whether that's learning how to shoot or learning all the conservation principles of it, learning animal ID, learning how to harvest. There's a really big component there. So this program essentially provides opportunities for new construction, development, and improvement to firearm and archery range facilities. Much like the boating program that we had talked about earlier, this program is going through a few modifications for it, so the deadline hasn't been determined yet. Again, we have a recreation grants newsletter that we highly recommend you signing up for. That's where we make all of our announcements about all upcoming deadlines and grant writing workshops. We do press releases as well, but our newsletter is really the most up-to-date and the most recommended option to get information about the grant programs. So once the deadline for this program is available and ready to go, and they're going to start accepting applications, all communications will be through our newsletter. So for this program, there's two different match requirements that I'll kind of talk about for it. It's a little unique compared to a lot of our other grant programs, as they actually allow planning grants. And so they will allow you to apply for a planning grant that will really get your ducks in a row and figure out what you actually need, maybe scout out locations. So all that planning involved in the pre-construction side, this program will actually support some of the costs for that. And then it will also support the construction of the actual facility. So the hope and the ideal project there is that if you do receive a planning grant, that there's a planning component there, and then it feeds into the actual construction of that target range facility. So with this program, the planning grants have a 90-10 match, meaning that the sponsor organization is responsible for coming up with at least 10% of that total grant funds. And the construction side of it, so all those construction materials and everything associated with the construction part, has a 75-25 match split. So you must come up with 25% of the total project grant funds. With this particular grant program, again, it's under a little bit of transition right now. So the current grant ceilings are being reevaluated. So once those applications open, the grant ceilings will be announced in the newsletter. And so again, it depends on how much money is available for that year and all the different funding resources. So that will all be announced once applications open. The Target Range program uses federal funds that are administered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services Wildlife Restoration Program via the Pittman-Robertson Act. And so that's where those funds come through. So there are predominantly federal funds for this program. Any government, tax exempt, and commercial entity is eligible to apply. So this program is open to quite a few different groups as far as eligibility. So you can be a private entity, a public entity, a municipality. All of those are definitely eligible through this program. There's not many of our programs that are open to private entities, so that's exciting there. For this program, it typically includes both indoor, outdoor, long and short range facilities designed for like archery, pistol, rifle, skeet, and trap shooting. So all of those are perfectly acceptable. The link to this program, so projects that would tend to be a little bit more competitive for the Target Range program grants, typically have that link to that Tpwd's Hunter Education Program, and that's a major consideration. So competitive projects typically include elements for teaching hunter education students to be conservation minded, include firearm safety instruction, and really bring awareness to all of the different hunting laws that are specific to hunting in Texas. So really it's not really just about constructing those facilities, but maybe including some of those education components. So whether that's having, building kind of an education facility on there to host some of these classes, and making sure that that facility also includes and offers some of those year-round hunter education courses associated with it. All right, so with that, I know that was a whole lot of information of just kind of the bare bones of that. But I recommend visiting our website to learn more about all of these different programs. Our website is kind of buried in the Texas Parks and Wildlife website, as are many of the Parks and Wildlife programs, but the link is available here, and I can definitely provide a PDF of this application if you wanted to have a link to this particular grant program. But also if you just Google co-op, or not co-op, but Texas Parks and Wildlife and Recreation Grants, all of our different programs will come up, and you'll be able to search all of the different deadlines coming up, and then be able to click on each program to look at very specific information on there. You can also contact both our phone number and email address listed here. For whatever program you're interested, if you contact either one of these, we'll direct you to the correct person, the correct program manager for this. So that's really the best way to get a hold of us. Again, if you go to the website, you can find specific information on certain grant programs, and like the managers for each different project are going to be listed there as well. But you can definitely just email the rec.grants email, and we can direct you to whoever it needs to be. Like I mentioned earlier, I highly recommend signing up for the Recreation Grants newsletter. A link for that newsletter is on our website, and that's where we really communicate all of the upcoming deadlines and announcements related to our grant programs. Many of our grant programs offer some sort of grant writing workshop or webinar. Typically, those have been in person, but I'll say in the last couple of years, we've just been doing webinars that are recorded. So like with the co-op program, we just did our webinar this week. And so we're not going to be doing some of those in-person courses, but these webinars are really fantastic as we'll walk you through all of the applications, the requirements for the program. We'll walk you through the different scoring criteria, and then we'll give you all the tools that you need to actually go through and apply for the program. Like I mentioned earlier, each program is so different in their application and their requirements and funding resources that they're all a little bit different. So it really depends on what program you're applying for. All applications for these grant programs are accepted in our what we call our Recreation Grants Online. We call it ARGO for short. And so that's where you can go to actually sign up and submit applications for these programs. Luckily on our end, we do not accept paper copies of grants anymore. So you can go in and sign up on ARGO, create an account through there, and then it'll list all of the different grant opportunities available. In the resources section of ARGO, there's also a lot more information very specific to each program. So for co-op, for example, we have our program guidance listed there, a PDF of the application so you can see it offline. We also have any sort of templates or examples of requirements that are in the application. They're all listed in that resources section, and it's really just everything you need to apply for the program. So I highly recommend checking out that resources section. And that's really the main things I have for this program. I know there may be a lot of questions depending on which particular program, so I'm going to open it up. Sarah, if you wanted to.
We've got lots of questions in the chat, so I'm just going to start from the beginning and read my way down.
All right.
So the first one we've got is from West Cave, and they're asking, can organizations apply for any of the categories where they already receive funding? For example, if we have a new eligible programs not currently receiving any funding. So my guess is like they have two programs, but applying for the same funding source. I think it's the question.
Yeah, so it all depends on the grant program, and it kind of depends on what you're asking for this question. So you can apply to all the different rec grants programs. So you applying to the local parks grant program will not affect your ability to apply for the co-op grant program. All of those are separate. So you can have different applications out to each one of our different programs at the same time. They won't affect one another. The only time they may affect one another is if they're for the same project. There might be some stipulations of what you can request in certain ones, but you can definitely have grants through multiple of our grant programs at the same time. If the question is directed as to can you have multiple of one particular grant program per organization? It really depends on the program you're applying to. So for co-op, you can only have one grant award at one time. So if you get a grant award with co-op, that's typically an 18-month grant. You wouldn't be able to reapply for another grant for 2 years after you got that award. So you cannot come in multiple times in the same year, or you can't even come in year after year. You can only have one grant at one time. With other programs, so let's say the local parks grant program, you can only submit one application per year, but I believe in the next year you're able to come in and submit another application as well. Construction projects in general just take a long time. Some of those projects take 3-4 years to construct the actual facility. So some entities may have multiple grants during that time, but I believe in each funding cycle that you can only request one project per year. I'm not entirely sure about all of the other programs of what their requirements. I believe some of like the boating and target range programs, you may be able to have multiple requests in the same year, but don't quote me on that. That's something I definitely have you ask that particular grant program for.
Thanks. We got a message from West Cave that you answered their question. So
perfect.
Yeah. So next we have a question from Jen, and she's asking the recording of the workshop that you did earlier this week, is that available on this Tpwd Rec Grants website here, or is it available somewhere else?
Yeah, so it's not available yet. We haven't downloaded it and posted it yet, just because it just happened and it's been a pretty crazy busy week. So, but it will be available next week. And it'll be available in the area where you apply for applications. So the website that we call Argo is where you actually go in and apply for websites. It'll be available in the resources section of Argo. You can actually access that by going to our section of the Tpwd website, and there's a little link that says apply manage grants. That will bring you to the link to the system to apply for grants. That'll bring you to the Argo link. So I would say probably by Monday or Tuesday of next week, that link should be available. I believe the PDF of the application is already available, and there's a link to last year's workshop, so it hasn't been updated yet.
And Charlie, I did put a link to Argo in the chat. So
awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so if anyone's looking for that, it's in the chat, and it's literally RGO. So if you all are looking for it,
yes.
There. Our next question is from Janet Lamanick, and she's wondering, for the co-op grant, does working with master naturalists count as working with one of the education programs?
Absolutely. So the Texas Master Naturalist, that's actually a partnership, I believe, between A&M and Parks and Wildlife. So the Texas Master Naturalist does count as an education program. So some of our grants will have master naturalists doing like leading educational activities for their participants, and just keep in mind that they need to be in their master naturalist role. And so one of the requirements for that program is to report your master naturalist volunteer hours and everything like that. So they can't just be like a staff member of the agency who happens to be a master naturalist. It really needs to be part of their volunteer hours. And so communicating that to the participants that, hey, you're a master naturalist, this is what the program does. And but yeah, having those people like lead activities and be involved in other ways will count as that relationship.
Great. Our next question relates to the Quick Start Guide, and that all the dates in there seem to be for 2020, and wondering if the local parks grant, I think, no, it was the I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember when this question came in. It was the Recreational Trails grant. Do you have a date yet for that one?
So the applications are not open for the Trails Grant Program yet, but I believe probably within the next month or so, they're probably going to be opening. I can't remember the exact date. But they have a deadline of February 1. The Quick Start user guide in Argo is really how to set up an account in the system. So that's all should be the same, even if the dates say 2020. That may have just been when those resources were created. It's a brand new system. So we're working all that out. But the deadline for that program is February 1, and it should be opening probably in the next month or so. Does that help answer the question?
I haven't heard otherwise, so I'm going to say yes.
Okay, all right. Let me know if you need other clarification for that.
Our next question is from Eric. He says they've received a rec trail grant in 2018 and 2020, but haven't received the funding yet. Can they still apply for another future project, or should they wait until they get the funding for the 2 unstarted projects?
That's a very good question, and I'm going to have to send you to Trey Cooksey or one of the grant coordinators, either Chris or Eric, for that. Construction just takes a while, but in particular with the recreational trails programs, it's funneled through a lot of different areas, and so it's federal funding. Everything has to get approvals from the Federal Highway Administration, and there's a lot of like pre-approvals before the project actually gets started, as I'm sure you're very aware of if you've already had 2 grants with them. And so it just takes a long time for that funding just to go in and get in place. It can take a while. So I'm not entirely sure. If you already have 2 and you're applying for 3rd, I'm just not entirely sure. I would say definitely contact Trey, as he's going to be the best one to help you out there. I know you can have multiple grants, but I don't know if there's a certain limit to that, either per year or just total max of how many people can apply.
Our next question is from Victoria, and it's also about the Recreational Trails grant. This is your most popular one, apparently, it looks like. Would temporary restrooms along a trail be eligible for the Rec Trails grant until larger permanent buildings are constructed at a site?
Ooh, good question. I have never received that question before for that one. So the quick answer is I have no idea. That's definitely a question for Trey, Chris, or Eric who run that program. I know that they definitely support like the permanent facilities, but I'm not entirely sure if temporary facilities until the new ones, until permanent ones can be built, would be available. I would say I'm definitely going to refer you to that staff for that question. Sorry about that. I wish I could answer that one.
Okay, we have a question about how to sign up for the newsletter, and I put that link in the chat as well. So if you're wondering how to do that, it's in the chat.
Thank you, Sarah.
Our next question is from Amy. Are any of the grants appropriate for a school district to apply to build an outdoor classroom for an early childhood school?
Ooh, good question. I think it depends on what you would specifically be applying for. You know, if you were looking at doing a trail on the facility to go around, I know that Recreational Trails program does allow ISDs to apply. For the co-op grant, we could support all of the educational components for the programming, but we wouldn't really be able to support the construction of the facilities. So if you needed infrastructure for that outdoor education area, the co-op program could not support that. But if you needed certain supplies and materials for the programming aspect of it, so your microscopes or telescopes or whatever you would need, that program co-op could support that. The only other program I could think that would do something like that, you wouldn't be eligible for. So the local parks program, you really have to be a government entity to apply. In certain cases, if a park is on a school property, there's typically a partnership between the municipality and the school district for that parkland, and so in some cases those are eligible. But for a specific outdoor classroom, I'm going to assume that that's probably not the case, so you wouldn't be eligible for that program. So unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of things that would be eligible for what you're looking for, I believe, unless you're looking on the back end for the programming side of it. But and once you have a built, co-op can absolutely support your programming costs.
I will also say, for those of you that are newer to Texas Children in Nature, because I saw a lot of names for registration that aren't people who we work with on a really regular basis. If you go to the Texas Children in Nature website, there's a drop down under resources for grants. And as we learn about grants, we put the links in there, and there are some on there that would be helpful, Amy, for building outdoor classroom spaces. I'm going through this. So can national organizations apply for a co-op grant for projects and programs administered by our Texas chapter of the organization?
Absolutely. So we do have kind of the umbrella groups apply for all work that's happening in Texas. The main thing to remember for co-op is that we cannot support activities with participants that are outside of the state of Texas. If you have like training or something that you need that isn't available in Texas, we can support you going to that training. But all activities with participants must take place in Texas. So you can't go to like Glacier National Park and do that. I wish we could support that, but it's state funding, so we can't. But we do have many different organizations who have a Texas-based chapter, but they're national, where their EIN number, their employee identification number, or their umbrella agency is actually a national organization in a different state, and that would be eligible to apply. So you'd apply under that umbrella organization or the national part of it, and then the Texas chapter of that would be doing all of the activities there. Just keep in mind that as far as payments and everything related to like a grant agreement is all funneled through the entity who has the EIN number. So we would actually then pay your national organization all of the funds and do all the reimbursements or advance payments through them. And then they would funnel down the money to the Texas chapter.
Hey, we've got another Rec Trails grant question. So do the Rec Trails grants only include soft surface trails, or can they include concrete trails also?
Perfect. I believe the answer to that is both. I had mentioned sidewalks earlier because if like some people have submitted applications where they really just wanted like a sidewalk next to like a parking lot or something, and it wasn't really connected to a full-on trail, like something like that wouldn't be eligible. But if it's an actual multi-use trail, and many multi-use trails now are made of concrete, those would absolutely be eligible, as long as it has those trail components and is considered like a multi-use trail. That would all be eligible. I know they do a variety of different grant services, whether it's, you know, just like the dirt or rocks or crushed granite or concrete. I know those are all included in it.
Great. That looks like it's our last question in the chat. But, I was wrong. More have come in.
Right.
What makes something a multi-use trail?
So multi-use trail, I'm not an expert on this, so don't quote me, but it's a variety of different things. So like hike and bike trails are a great example of that. And so something where people can go walking or hiking on, but also biking. All of those are included of that. I don't know all the official language for trails on that. It's been a while since I've constructed a trail. But I know it just has all of those multiple components of it. And so some examples of that would be of a multi-use trail would be like the Violet Crown Trail in Austin, or the Ladybird Lake Trail, in like San Antonio, the River Walk, and all of that has that long, you know, outside of the main area, that long trail system. All of those would be considered the multi-use trails.
And then I think this is just a clarification of that, is would that apply to the establishment / construction of bridges or constructed wooden ADA items?
Absolutely. And so ADA instruction is definitely important, especially in the evaluation of grant programs, but the grant would support all of those amenities that are related to the trail as well. So the trailheads, all of the different things. And so if you have an area where it's going over water or anything, and there's a bridge on that trail, I believe it would support all of the costs for that bridge. For details on like the specific thing that you're trying to do, I might refer you to the trail staff to help answer that question. But I know, like, especially in state parks for their grant programs, I believe bridges like trail bridges were part of that.
Perfect. Thank you, Carly. I'll keep an eye on the chat, see if any more come in, because last time I said we didn't have any more. I got 3 right away. For any of you who came in after we'd already started, we are recording today's session, and I'll be putting this recording up on our YouTube channel tomorrow. And all of our past webinars are up there as well, which could answer a few of the other questions that I've seen come in. And then also I will put in the chat in just a second a link to our Texas Children in Nature grants page. It is still a very new page. It was released yesterday. So if you're not seeing a grant that you are looking for on there, please be patient with us. We are adding more every day. And thank you so much, Carly. We really appreciate it. And I'm so excited to share this information with all our partners.